The Oregon Education Investment Board will please come to order, and if Seth will call the roll.
Governor Kitzhaber.
Here.
Julia Brim Edwards.
Present.
Yvonne Curtis.
Present.
Matthew Donegan.
Here.
Samuel Henry.
Here.
Nicole June Maher.
Here.
Mark Mobihill.
Here.
David Reeves. Ron Saxton. Mary Scody. Kate Duran.
Do we have a quorum?
Hannah Vandering.
Here.
Dick Whitnell. Here.
Have a quorum. Very good. First action item would be the approval of the minutes from the September meeting. Has everyone had a chance to look at those? Okay. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes. Is there discussion? Hearing none, so ordered. The next item is hopefully the approval of the recommendations from the Outcome and Investment Subcommittee. And I just wanted to take a couple minutes and provide a little context for this, because I know there was some concern about sending forth a sort of a large, amorphous set of recommendations without, a context. So I think we all recognize that 40-40-20 is indeed an aspirational goal, but I actually believe that we can make it by the 2025 timeframe, or at least move it over the horizon so we have a direct line of sight in terms of the deliverables. To do that, we have to, I think, more strategically structure our system to deliver a high-quality learning experience that's seamless from birth to career. And that means we're going to have to leverage limited resources. We're going to have to leverage best practices. We're going to have to leverage the energy that's out there in the community. And I think we need to focus specifically on the opportunity gaps and on those key leverage points that we know can accelerate the outcome of student success. And that is, after all, why we created the Oregon Education Investment Board, and that's why we have a strong, forward-looking Chief Education Officer. I want to remind you that the OEIB really is the only entity in the state of Oregon that is specifically charged with looking across the entire continuum of education and breaking down silos. That is trying to move the state from a passive investor to a passive funder to a strategic investor in education. And so ideally, the flow of money in this system is a current that moves the dial on student success and student attainment. So in putting forward these strategic investments that came from this subcommittee and trying to build a unified education budget, I think it's important that we actually know that there's a larger plan behind it. One that will incentivize the right kind of changes in institutional behavior, and that will make the best educational opportunities available to every student in the state. We had this conversation before, but the OAB is not actually a budget committee or a Ways and Means committee, but it can and in fact should act as a very powerful motivator for creative thinking and be an active and meaningful partner in translating the 40-40-20 vision into specific action steps. And I think that's actually the job that you've done. We've got a lot of smart, independent, strong-willed people here who don't always agree with one another, and we've seen that play out here over the last few months, but I think that's a good thing. You've expressed your own individual viewpoints, you've challenged approaches, you've challenged assumptions, and you've also demonstrated respect for Dr. Golden, while not always agreeing with her, without minimizing or diminishing your voice and your influence in the process. And for that, I just want to thank you. So today, hopefully, we'll approve the recommendations of the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee, which, as you know, are organized into three broad pathways, each of which has a set of strategic strategies for implementation. And the three broad pathway areas are the pathway to kindergarten readiness and third grade reading. The second one is pathway to high school and post-secondary completion, and the third is the pathway that connects education to career. So I want to thank you for the hard work, and I'm hoping that I will gain your support to move this forward, and I want to tell you why I think it's important that we do so. So a recommendation by the Oregon Education Investment Board to move forward with this set of recommendations provides me with a roadmap that can guide the investment strategies in the creation of the 2015-17 Governor's recommended budget, which has to be released by December 1st, which means I've got to close it out somewhere in the middle of November in order to get it to the printer. As I tried to do in the 13-15 budget, it's my intent to do all I can to dedicate the available resources, including some significant savings that we're beginning to realize, and I'm going to come back to that in just a moment, to support smart strategic investments that actually move us towards the 40-40-20 goals. And I do want to say that now that we have 1 million people in the Oregon Health Plan because of the ACA expansion, and that's a care model that's growing at 3.4% a year, and state revenues are growing somewhere north of 4.5% a year, and the fact that we've moved PEB members into that same care model, we're on a trajectory to save the state by the 21-23 biennium around $3 billion general fund. And if we roll OEB in, that comes closer to $4 billion, which is significant because we could potentially, barring the collapse of the economy or the kicker kicking, eliminate the structural budget deficit we've had since ballot measure 5 in the 1921 biennium and actually have a structural budget surplus in the 21-23 biennium going forward, which could have a profound impact on our ability to actually reinvest in the enterprise of education. So the process that I would use if you approve the recommendations would be to take those strategies and take them to budget management and have them costed out, because we don't know how much they cost at this point. We get the revenue forecast, I think, in the first week of November. So then we have a real context, and I think it's clear that we're probably not going to be able to do all of these, or at least all of them to the extent that we would like to, so that I would bring this back to the Oregon Education Investment Board and ask you to make recommendations on prioritizing these strategic investments, and then I would use that to guide what I put into the final budget. So let me just see if we have any questions and comments. I know there are members, including I think Hannah and also Mary Spildy, who have some concerns about key elements in that strategy, so maybe we could discuss that at this point before we actually take a motion. Or not. Yeah, Mary?
Okay.
Yes, Hannah.
There are a lot of proposals in these 3 buckets that we've created that have the capacity to really help students in Oregon. And I think that one of the things that I appreciate having them costed out and prioritizing, because I think that's important for us. But what would be extremely helpful is to ensure that they're actually vetted with our district leaders and our educators across the state. There are a few of the proposals in here that we talked about extensively. I've asked for research on and feedback on who worked on this, and they really haven't. They've involved higher level administrators, but they haven't really got down to having some conversations with those that are working with our students every day. I'll use the ELL as an example of that, and one that we have reached out to get some educators who have been successful with our students, who are seeing they're actually level 4 school doing great things with our ELL students, to ask them what are they doing. And that's one of my asks to this board and to Dr. Golden, who I know is dedicated to getting out and talking with people, is making sure that we understand the implications of the changes. Changing the formula to the ELL, there are 168 districts that are going to lose money and 28 that are going to gain money with that proposal. It doesn't, I don't believe it's been vetted to understand that that's truly going to make a difference for our students. As we look at the proposals coming back and the actual cost, we can prioritize them, which is a really good process, but also we have to determine what's coming off the plate. If we're going to move the money around, then something can't be done that is being done. And if there's something in our system, any project or any program that we have in place that's not meeting the needs of our students, then we should adjust it. But without having those conversations, without really looking at what our districts have sent back in their compacts as their strategies and tactics to move us to those goals that we've set in 40-40-20, then I'm not sure how we're expecting the departments to give us the proposals, and that'll really move the dial.
I think those are very good points. Mary, did you have a concern you wanted to express? I don't want to put words in your mouth. I just heard this
Yeah.
in the grapevine.
Thank you, Governor. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. So, first of all, I would say that conceptually, I think I support these three proposals, and I think they're the first three essential steps in a sequence of actions that need to be taken. So I think the focus on early learning and K-12 is really appropriate, but I hope that as we go forward, we have more substantive conversations and proposals regarding higher education. So that's my first point.
Okay.
The second issue is to do with the career and technical education, part of the pathway to continuing education to careers. I just want to hope that we understand that the key here is partnership, that there's an incredible amount of infrastructure already built in community colleges, and I hope the plan is to leverage that rather than creating either new facilities or programs, unless that's really essential because a particular part of the state doesn't have access to those partnerships with community colleges.
Okay.
And the third and the greater concern that I personally have, and that's to do with outcomes under higher education productivity, the piece about performance-based funding. And I am personally opposed to that. The research from the Community College Research Center related to community colleges, and that center is at Columbia, has not been able to find that it makes much of a difference in student learning outcomes. And so I do not think that performance-based funding is a good answer to what needs to happen. However, having said that, community college presidents are working really hard on trying to develop strategies to improve the funding formula that we have. So those are three things that I would just like to have on the record. I am going to vote for the proposals because I think they do have to be fleshed out a little more and will be fleshed out a little more. And I think those conversations will take place with all the parties at the table. And so I'm willing to support the proposal. And thank you for the time.
Yep. So let me make a suggestion. And Dick, did you want to add
No,
something?
I was just going to make a comment and make a motion.
Please, and then we can have some more discussion.
Well, when you said smart and independent, I'm sure you're referring to the subcommittee that was on that, and that was Pamela Curtis, Duncan Wise, and Ron Saxon, and Hannah. I'm chair of it. I'm the C- student that's on it. But seriously, though, I think of Dick Alexander, and Dick Alexander, big bucket here was the Early Learning Council, and you know, he was a business person as Ron and I remember it was Ron, the OEIP, that finally woke up to the fact that it was the early learning that really could feed into the rest of what we're all about. So I would move that we accept the outcomes of investment subcommittee recommendations, and this is the second reading.
Thank you. Before I place the motion, let me maybe put a caveat on here, and I don't know how we work this in, but from a process standpoint, maybe we could have the record reflect that this vote is really, that we generally agree that these three pathways are important, that it is important to cost them out so that we understand exactly what they are, but that does not necessarily mean that there is unanimity on the policies behind each one. Obviously, Mary has indicated, and it's nothing new about the performance aspect of post-secondary education. Hannah has, I think, correctly raised some questions about whether these have been vetted with practitioners who are actually doing this, and there is no question that any time you try to fund something else, you have that inherent tension between the base budgets, and if it's a zero-sum box, something has to go off things that come in, and we haven't really had the chance to have that conversation. So I would accept the motion with the caveat that this is a process motion at this point to move the budget process forward, but we would come back to the OAIB to get a sense of priority and to have a larger discussion about some of the issues that have been raised.
Are you looking for a second?
So the motion has been made and seconded. Now, is there any further discussion or anything else people would like to put on the record? Yes.
Yes, thank you, Governor. I wanted to thank the staff for providing the additional information about impacted students that we requested. It's very helpful to get a sense of the magnitude of the students and also the sort of further more granular information about whether it's a subset or the entire amount of, or the entire group of students. I also want to indicate that somebody who raised a question earlier about the budget impact and sort of return on investments. I appreciate and support the process that the governor has laid out, that we're going to proceed, and we'll be supporting the motion. Just one additional piece of information I'll just put out that I'd be interested in having for when it eventually comes back to the board is in those instances where there's a strategy that the funding is not focused on all students. For example, accelerated learning opportunities, there's a focus of 40,000 students out of a universe of 170,000. And I'd be interested in sort of contextually what are those 40,000? Are the other 130,000 students going to be sequenced in long term, or is this if we move these 40, it has implications for the other 130? So that's just another piece of more granular information I'd want when we come back to the prioritization process.
Okay. Yes, Mark, and then Hannah.
I'll be voting in support of it. I'll be voting in support of the process by the subcommittee. I think you've done an excellent job, Dick, in moving this through. I think it meets the direction the governor has said to give outside-the-box thinking as he crafts his budget to start the process for the session. And I guess what I really recognize in your group is we've held very, very tight to what we've talked about for about 4 years, from third grade reading, 11 to 14. And this budget reflects that, and I appreciate all the work the group's done.
Hannah?
Just two other documents that we haven't reviewed, we talked about a little bit, and I hope we can get to as we're looking at prioritizing and looking at what should come off. One is page 52 and 53 of the QEM report. Really outlines the prototypical school that talks about what we should have in place. And if people haven't had an opportunity to review this document, highly recommend look at this. There's best practice that's embedded into this report. It doesn't have the amount of money it takes, and that's not what's important. What's important is providing the quality learning environment for every student. And the second that we've talked about, and I know Nancy and Lindsay have been working on trying to find a way to incorporate this in our work, is the Tell Oregon survey results.
Right.
And it is, I think we have an opportunity in Oregon. We asked educators, administrators, and classroom teachers what their perceptions were of the teaching and learning conditions. And if we don't use that to help us make the decisions that will move us forward, then I think we're being disrespectful to the process. And I believe that once we look at this and engaging parents around the proposals after they're costed out to prioritize and see their hopes and dreams, I think the process would be respectful and one that we could all feel really good about.
Good. Thank you. David?
Governor?
Just a second. I got David Reeves here, and then we'll move to you.
Okay, thank you. Just two things. I want to concur with Mary that I too am not convinced that outcomes-based funding really makes a big difference in completion, as we've seen in other states. And I would like to get a clarification on the final outcome measure on pathways connecting education to careers. And it's because we have changed this through the process. And I just want to make sure number of graduates employed in STEM fields, that there's some discussion on the appropriate subcommittee and or this board as to what constitutes those STEM fields. It's that I think there's if you talk to different people, you'll get different definitions of what degrees fall under STEM and what not. I think you should also take into account some of the work in the report from the Higher Education Coordinating Commission and Oregon Workforce Investment Board Task Force that talked about focusing on high demand degrees and coordinating that with community colleges and universities and what they offer, and being relevant to what employers want and what's going on there. I think that should be taken into account too. So I'd like to make sure that just doesn't get defined by one person somewhere, just kind of trying to get it done, but it does go through a committee or board and gets people from the Workforce Investment Board and the Education Coordinating Commission involved in that.
Was that Ron Saxton, phone?
That was, and I apologize. I drove to Salem for the meeting and found myself alone in the Capitol building. So,
Maybe you could pass a few laws while you're down there.
I'm back in the car driving towards you, and we'll get there shortly. But I as a member of the subcommittee with Dick, wanted to first say I strongly support the list of recommendations being brought forward. And I think your proposal for how to deal with them from a budget context of taking them forward and pricing them out is exactly the right thing to do. So I'll be voting yes and strongly support this.
Okay.
And I'll see you soon.
All right, thank you. So I don't want to put anybody in a box here. I'm gonna call the roll because I got to get a vote, but I want to make sure that Hannah and Mary, if you're uncomfortable voting for it, if you want to vote for it with caveats, or if you're comfortable with sort of how we framed this.
So can you read the motion again?
Well, the motion was to accept the recommendations of the subcommittee, and what I had attempted to put on the record was that this is to some extent a process vote to allow the budget process to go forward, but it didn't suggest that there was unanimity on the individual strategies, and I think we put on the record 3 sets of concerns, the concerns that you laid out about whether practitioners in the field who are actually having success with this have been consulted, issues about the you cited the TEL survey, and I think it was 2 pages in the quality education model. Mary stated a couple of concerns about post-secondary education, and David raised the issue of the STEM fields and making sure that we looked at the work that had already been done and have this go through some committee process, not just sort of arbitrarily stuck in here. Wow, that's a lot of caveats.
So we're moving them forward so that we can look at the budget implications and then come back and prioritize. It wouldn't be moved forward as these are the 3 buckets and all of these things should be moved in legislation. Is that?
I think that there would be an intermediate step. I mean, I think there's probably disagreement on this board about which ones of these and how many should be moved forward, but this is not a motion to endorse what's moved forward in legislation. It would be a motion to essentially get the budget information and then to allow us to have a secondary conversation.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, clerk call roll.
Julia Graham Edwards,
Yes?
Yvonne Curtis,
Yes.
Matthew Donegan,
Yes.
Samuel Henry,
Yes.
Nicole June Maher, Mark Mobile,
Yes.
David Reeves,
Yes.
Ron Saxton,
Yes.
Mary Spildy,
Yes.
Kay Turan, Hannah Vendering,
Yes?
Dick with no.
Yes. Very good. Motion carries. Lost another knuckle.
I'm sorry, this is Nicole. Did you get my yes vote?
We do now. Thank
Okay,
you.
yes.
Nicole is recorded as a yes.
And Kay, are you on the phone? I know you were attempting to get on.
Okay, then the next action item is to hopefully adopt the recommendations of the best practices subcommittee recommendations. And Yvonne, can you give us a little update on where we are there?
Yes, I can. If you look at the sheet in front of you, it's a 2-page sheet, and we've identified, kind of similarly to the 3 buckets in the last motion, now we're looking at the areas that are highlighted: K through 12 student transitions 11 to 14, educator quality, and digital conversion. These are areas in which we received reports and some recommendations by multiple groups of people doing work on these. And our intent and I guess really our ask of this board, I'm going to follow the governor's lead when he said, why is it important to support these? We're really asking for your support in moving them forward so that it sort of signals to all of the agencies and all the people doing the work that we as an OEIB board believe these things are important and need to continue going forward. You notice that we've kind of identified them as either potential tasks or work that's underway or work that we would assign to an agency. So I think we have had conversations with all of those groups that would be responsible for the work. This positive vote in support of this recommendations would enable us to now go back to those groups and say, yes, the OEIB thinks this work is important. As of the last conversation, I know there were some questions, just like our last conversation about, the price tag and those kinds of things. What are the outcomes? When are we going to deliver on those? We will be asking the groups in this next year as a part of our work plan to get very specific about what outcomes they're working on and what dates they expect to achieve them by, providing them more specific information in the next go-round. We will be really focusing in on the student transitions 11 to 14 and building upon the work that we saw today from the Accelerated Learning Committee as well. So we're just asking for support of this board to move all of these projects forward in support of the 40-40-20 goal.
So let's get a motion and then we can have discussion.
So moved.
Okay, have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to basically adopt the recommendations of the best practices subcommittee. Is there discussion? Julie?
Yes, and I want to thank the chair. I had an earlier discussion with her about how this integrates with the sort of base work plan, and I think it would be useful for those board members who aren't on the committee to integrate this set of recommendations with the base work plan so that we can see the totality. I'm looking at the base work plan, and if you took the two documents, put them together with deliverables, timelines, and roles and responsibilities, I think that would be a useful tool overall for the board, especially those members who aren't on the committee. Also, the other thing that would be useful is to see is if the board sort of resourced and stuck to the timelines and the deliverables, how that would impact the trajectory of 40-40-20. So if you take all the individual actions and sum them up, is it changing the trajectory in a positive way of where we want to go? So that would just be my request of the bigger frame, put it in a bigger framework.
We will do that.
Very good.
Maybe I should say we will do that where we know how to do that. On some of those, we're already collecting that information, I think, through the multiple agencies and the research that's being done, as well as the data collection. But what we will do is on the ones that we are not yet able to measure in that way or sort of extrapolate to sort of that kind of guess at what the future would be, we'll just call that out and tell why and identify the barriers and then the steps that we're going to recommend to addressing those barriers.
Hannah?
I just had a couple of questions on the student transition 11-14B, the work that's being done in this area to maximize his senior year. Is there any conversation about students and parents and bringing together educators, K-12 and higher together to work with the department on how to use some strategies that might be helpful? Because it appears to me that a lot of students choose not to take a full schedule their senior year, and we talk a lot about the remedial classes that are necessary. Some of our students aren't taking math or language arts their senior year. So did you guys talk about that? I'm sorry.
I can maybe grab that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked at length about that, Hannah, and you're spot on that. We know that the senior year for many of our students is the least academic. And what we're finding is kids who don't then place into the appropriate classes in college and then their success rate, really where that conversation has been with the developmental education topic in subcommittee, we talk about that quite a bit. In fact, we also had a conversation today about the work with Smarter Balance on how that assessment, as we transition and evolve that, how that may move into a way to limit the volume of testing on kids.
Yes, Julie?
Just to sort of build on Hannah's comment, that was one of the items on the work plan that I thought was of most interested. I have a slightly different take, although I think Hannah's suggestion is excellent. But I guess I'm curious why it's only focused on the senior year. So I think if you look at by some students' senior year, they're not there anymore. They've dropped out, or they're not on track to avoid remedial classes post-graduation. So I'm curious, it seems like you want to catch them that trajectory at a ninth grade year, so that by the time they get to their senior year, they are not only on track for meeting the graduation requirements, but also, having the ability to be able to take those 3 college level classes, whether it's dual credit, AP, IB. So I guess I'm looking at is there a ramp up versus the senior year being the focus?
So absolutely. I think the language there, the intent is to give that as an example. I really think that the bulk of the work around 11 to 14 that will happen this year that we're in, that is a work of best practice, working with the HEC, working with the items that are in the Accelerated Learning Committee report, which we haven't seen yet, so that I keep referring to that because we just saw that today and I was going to speak about that when I recapped our meeting. But I certainly think that all of those conversations need to happen and the specifics need to come out, so that's more of an example than a limiting factor. So I think what we can do is say that that really is about how you get that trajectory and how kids stay on the pathway all the way through, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, it's like more of a ramp up
Right.
through the high school years, and then the optimization of the senior year.
And I think it crosses over many things. It crosses over the developmental ed conversation. It crosses over the dual credit, and so there's a couple of measures there where we have to look at that kind of trajectory on all of those in order to match them up and make sure kids are on that pathway. So I think especially around 11 to 14, what we were doing was trying to summarize and prioritize all that we had heard around work that people thought ought to be done. Now we'll dig in with those groups that are actually going to have responsibility for getting that work accomplished. So I think that includes recommendations like Hannah has about including students, families, faculty and teachers at both, in both entities. So we still have a lot of work to do. Again, this is a calling out that we need to pay attention to these things, and now we need to go dig into the work.
Yeah, I'd like to dovetail, that using it as an example is really what that was, Julia, but I guess I kind of think of it that the bookends for students, kindergarten through 12th grade. Kindergarten, we currently have a half day. For many of our seniors, we currently have a half day. And the idea is, how are we going to increase time strategically? How are we going to maximize the senior year and start getting those early college credits, even though they should be earlier than the senior year? It was more of addressing the critical area, like half-day kindergarten, half-day senior year.
David and then Hannah.
Yeah, and I think I agree with what you're saying, Julia, and I don't think these recommendations count that out. Certainly we did focus a lot on senior year because that was a lot of the discussion recently, and also talking about college and high school and things, that is what a lot of it's centered around. And I would even say even more than, we talk about summer melt on the second page here, but been hearing more about just even senior year melt, even of not maintaining academics through that senior, and that's how that's hurting us. So I think that's in line with these recommendations. I'd also say too, we haven't mentioned this yet, but I think the first recommendation on there with the K-12 student transitions about working with English learners who are entering high school without sufficient English proficiency. A lot of the research has shown it's where we're losing a lot of kids. That's a huge barrier, and I think that's a very important thing to call out in this report, that we're going to start focusing on that and look at ways to assist these students, because once they get into high school, if they're not getting enough, they're not advancing enough in their English proficiency, we're losing them. They're dropping out, succeeding. So I think that's something really important to call to.
Hannah?
Just to, one more point on that, and then I have another. When we look at equity, we have a great deal of students who their senior year, actually their junior year, they're working. And so as we use our equity lens, and have this conversation about senior year and how we make sure that our students can have access to their senior year full schedule, that would be something I'd be interested in hearing more information about as well. The next one on D, so it's the student 11-14 transition. D talks about smarter balance being used in lieu of placement tests. And I think we should be very careful. Smarter balance has just been rolled out. It hasn't been fully vetted. We don't have any information back from the pilots on how our students actually did, whether it's actually aligned with the Common Core standards. So I would be very careful putting out that smarter balance will be what we will use until we're really sure that it meets the needs of our students and helps us understand where they are on those standards.
At this point, that is why we landed on the intentional language of explore further. Explore future use. There is a group working on that, and I know we'll be getting some more information on that right now. But our intent is say, yes, let's explore that, and the interest is let's limit the number of tests and make sure that we're selecting the right ones that help us understand if kids are ready. So it's kind of proxy for that right now.
And we're doing some incredible work, thanks to the governor and Nancy and Rob in the department, on creating assessments and an assessment system in Oregon that we can all be proud of, and that honors student learning, and I think could be powerful in the work that we're doing moving forward. So I appreciate that clarification.
And we did talk about that a little bit this morning in the transition subcommittee, and I know we're going to be talking about it later today, so we move that to this board. You're right, it needs a lot more exploration, and we had a lot of questions for that presentation. I assume this board will too as we move further on with that.
Julie?
So on that same point, the explore future use, I guess one of the things, I'm just going to approach it from a sort of student, family, parent perspective. The words explore the future use, I guess to me, I'm not set on whether it's smarter balanced or something else, but from a parent and student and family perspective, that if the explore is a multi-year process that results in students still facing a sort of the range of tests, I think we need to be more urgent. Again, it doesn't have anything to do with whether it's smarter balance or something else, but just this issue of students leaving and, depending on where they, what institution they might look at in terms of community college, they might face a different placement test. I think we should look at this with some urgency, just the cost to the students in terms of remedial education.
Is there further discussion? Seth, will you call the roll? And include me this time.
Julie Edwards,
Yes.
Yvonne Curtis,
Yes.
Matthew Donegan, Samuel Henry,
Yes.
Nicole June Maher,
Yes.
Mark Mobile,
Yes.
David Reeves,
Yes.
Ron Saxton,
Yes.
Mary Spilding,
Is that a yes? Mary?
Yes, indeed it was.
Okay.
Kay Turan,
Yes.
Hannah Van Ryn,
Yes.
Dick Withnell,
Yes.
Governor Kitzhaber.
Yes. Motion passes, and if it would be all right, I'd like to have my vote recorded as yes on the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee report as well. Thank you. Too late? Is it too late? There's an objection from the former head of the HEC. Yeah, good job, Ben, so far.
Here's your watch.
Okay, now we get to the fun part. The fact that Nancy is wearing red for Teachers' Day does not give her any special privileges when it comes to evaluating her performance. Julia, would you summarize where we are? Yes, please.
Good afternoon, Julia Brum-Edwards, Chair of the Personnel and Management and Oversight Committee of the Oregon Education Investment Board. I didn't get the red memo. In fact, I had no power this morning, so I couldn't pick red even if I wanted to. In addition to myself on the committee, the other members of the committee are Kay Turan and Dick Withnell. We were appointed last summer to provide both management and oversight for the Chief Education Officer. The board and the attendees should have available a copy of the chair's summary of the performance evaluation. I thought before I jumped into some of the highlights, I provide just a brief outline of the process. Some of you may have experienced part of it, but just wanted to share what process we went through to produce the chair's summary today. So the board, as you all may recall, reviewed criteria for the evaluation form. Board members were asked to complete the evaluation template. Staff and community feedback was solicited through a survey and a modified evaluation template. And just to be clear, the staff and community feedback was to inform the committee's work and to provide a community perspective. The feedback was not evaluative, as that is the board's role. Both written and verbal feedback was provided to the subcommittee chair. The subcommittee last month met in executive session with Dr. Golden and provided a summary of the findings and recommendations. And the summary today reflects a chair's draft with synthesized findings and recommendations to present to the board. Going forward, if the board accepts the finding and recommendations, there will be a final performance review document provided to Dr. Golden, and the subcommittee would then meet with Dr. Golden to establish the final work plan and metrics for the current year, and that's a discussion I know that, speaking for the other members of the committee, that we look forward to having with Dr. Golden. So in terms of the summary, I'm going to go over some of the highlights of the findings of the draft evaluation. There's also recommendations and development opportunities for Dr. Golden embedded in the document. I'm not going to read through the entire document, but thought I'd hit on some of the highlights. So the position of the Chief Education Officer is a relatively new and evolving position in Oregon, and frankly, is fairly unique in the country. Dr. Golden met or exceeded expectations for her first year in that role and accomplished a major reset of the position with the public and the Oregon Education Investment Board. In order for the OAB to carry out its legislative charter and build a student-focused agency and culture within the P20 system, Dr. Golden needed to restore trust, credibility, and connection to the diverse stakeholders and educators. And she did that. In terms of highlights of the work this last year, she built foundational systems for the office, implemented the first round of strategic investments, supported the realignment of Oregon's higher education system, and also the implementation of the statewide equity lens to close the opportunity gap. Dr. Golden, I think one of the things that was particularly interesting in this process is the board's individual evaluations and the communities. There was a lot of alignment actually in the perspectives of the work that's been done this last year, and I think universally there was appreciation for Dr. Golden's having a student-centered vision that's been informed by her years as an educational leader, and that she's fostered greater trust and support from leadership in diverse communities throughout the state. It should be noted that Dr. Golden can't do this alone. She's the leader and coordinator of Oregon's P20 efforts, and to achieve the goals that have been set will require both additional support and action by this board and by the legislature. She'll also need agency leaders to drive the shared vision of 40-40-20 goals by 2025 deeper into their organizations. And I think there was universal agreement that this was a outstanding foundational year, and that the 2014-15 school year presents an opportunity for implementation of the strategies and tactics mapped to 40-40-20. Let's see, in addition, as part of the ongoing dialogue with Dr. Golden, she's identified student transitions as a unique leverage point for the OEIB and her office. And that in coming years, she'll prioritize activities, investments, and work of the board around those transitions. To go into the specific findings of the performance evaluation, there were 5 focus areas. I'm just going to, at a very high level, cover those for the record. That first, Dr. Golden met expectations on implementing and leading the P20 system. She set the right direction for P20 public education in the state, and I think from a universal standpoint, the board recognized that this work requires a significant shift and is still in its early stages. To have people viewing the entire continuum and not just the specific segment that they're in. So this is a sort of a long term, but that she met expectations in that front. There were a series of recommendations contained in the written evaluation around that goal. Second, Dr. Golden met expectations in developing and adopting a strong policy framework. Again, there's a set of recommendations and potential development opportunities that will be built into the work plan for next year on that front. Third, Dr. Golden met the board's expectations in developing recommendations for an outcomes-based budget aligned to P20 education initiatives, and is continuing to evolve the process to better pinpoint resources on improving student achievement. I think it's fair to say that there's been important learnings in this year's process that should inform the future work of the board's strategic investment process. Fourth, Dr. Golden's efforts to build an engaged and motivated public exceeded the board's expectations. Dr. Golden has a strong vision, is a tireless leader, is a great listener, is visible and engaged in communities across Oregon. I think if anybody who's seen Nancy's travel schedules, which we all have, she's tireless. And I would say also a universal sort of feedback across the board and broader community that responded to the performance evaluation is that there's an appreciation that Dr. Golden on a daily basis demonstrates that she's a public education champion. It should be noted in this area about building an engaged and motivated public that this is a long-term initiative that will require sustained effort, not just on the part of Dr. Golden, the governor, the board members, but all the stakeholders and citizens of the state. The fifth area in the performance evaluation was around personnel and agency management, and Dr. Golden exceeded the board's expectation in personnel and agency management. She restored confidence and support for the position of Chief Education Officer. She's mastered the fundamentals, ensuring that she and her staff had the required ethics and administrative training, and that tools and protocols are in place for sound use of taxpayers' dollars. Dr. Golden clearly focused her work on Oregon and its students and built trust in agency, structure, and staff teams to support and deliver on visions and goals. One recommendation is that, as a follow-on, just in relation to staff, to continue to build and retain an effective OEIB staff team, and setting clear expectations for and ensuring accountability of agency leaders who report to the Chief Education Officer. So I think it's fully outlined in written form, so I'm not going to go into all of the details. I just want to say, and then I'll ask either Dick or Kay if they'd like to offer other commentary, but just want to add in conclusion that on a personal note, that Dr. Goldman's been an engaged and thoughtful partner to the subcommittee, and it's been great working with you this year and looking forward to the year ahead. So with that, I'd like to ask Dick if you have anything.
Well, first of all, Julie, I'd like to thank you for the hard work you put in on this. I mean, my gosh, it's really been a lot of work for you. I appreciate that. I think the one statement that you made that you can't do it alone is really a fact. And even the governor can't do it alone, and the OEI board can't do it by itself. And so we need the whole state of Oregon to get behind our education system. I look at Nancy as a coach. I can't remember any Super Bowl coach scoring a touchdown. It was the team that did that, and that's what she is about. She's the coach of our Oregon education investments. And so I think she's doing a great job. All I want is to be on the top 10%, and I don't want to be in the bottom 10% anymore. And so I think we're at a great start, and the next 2 years will really make a difference.
This is Kate speaking, and I concur with what Dick and Julia have both reported. I would like to say that this has not been just a one-shot evaluation. Our chair has been meeting with Dr. Golden throughout the last year, and I think that's important if you're going to have a really thorough evaluation, that it doesn't just reflect the input from one point in time. I also want to echo what Dick said. I think that we have a lot of work to do here in Oregon to land in that top 10, 15%. And I think we're pointed in the right direction. I think Dr. Golden is doing a great job of providing us the leadership, but it's going to take all of us, all of our communities, all of our neighbors to really make a difference in public education in Oregon.
Thanks, Kay. So the action is to, what is the action here? To basically keep her around?
Move to accept
I can leave with Ben.
evaluation.
So just really briefly, this has been quite an odyssey, and I'm convinced that if we're going to meet our goals, we're not just going to do it with money, although that's really important. We're not just going to do it with technology advances, which also is critical. It's going to require really inspired leadership that has the capacity to align interests around student outcomes, who can create a future while building in the past and not abandoning trust. And we have someone here who has both technical experience and adaptive experience. Really a remarkable woman who I have been struck by her, not only her knowledge and her enthusiasm, but her just incredible optimism about what can be done. So I would entertain a motion to keep Nancy around.
Keep Nancy around.
Moved and seconded that we continue our relationship with Nancy as Oregon's Chief Education Officer. Is there discussion? Is there objection? So ordered. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Would you like to say a few words?
I just, first of all, wanted to thank the committee and the whole board for the evaluation. I think it's very important as we move forward, so I really appreciate it, and I do appreciate the work. Julia said I have been around the state, and I think that has been indeed true, and I've loved it, and what has impressed me most is how far people come to talk about education. And when I was in John Day, people drove 4 hours to come to a forum because they believe so deeply in the 40-40-20 goal by 2025 and the outcomes on the Achievement Compact. And when you talk to people about, do you believe students should come to kindergarten ready to learn? Everybody's yes. And if you say, and if you get that, can you have all reading proficiently by 3rd grade? They say yes, and we could go all the way up the pathway till we start talking about affordability, accessibility, and completion in college. And people around the state are very motivated to make that happen. I have to say it's not only people around the state, it's all the agencies that I get to work with. I have not been in a conversation with Megan, Rob, or Ben, 3 people, Rob and Ben, who I supervise, when they weren't talking as much about Ben cares as deeply about third grade reading as he does about high school completion. That's what it's going to take in order for kids to move smoothly along the pathway. The other thing that I think is, so I believe deeply in the Oregon Education Investment Board. I believe deeply in creating a seamless system and focusing on transitions. And I think the focus on transition is really key in overcoming barriers with these transitions. And I would just say today from best practices, when we talk about accelerated reading, learning, and the opportunity for students to take a college course in high school, these could be students who never thought they could achieve in a college course. They maybe never thought of themselves as college goers. They might be the first person in their family to even touch a college course. And that opportunity could overcome tremendous barriers for them in really being a completer in college and, of course, helping us achieve the 40-40-20 goal. I can tell you for parents, it's a huge dream. It's a big dream. And it's something that I'm proud to be part of a team that's really going to make that happen for Oregon students. I do have to say I was in Bethel School District speaking the other day, and we met in a church. And when I left, the woman came up to me, she said, "I'm the preacher's wife, and I want you to know you sound like a preacher." And I said, "Well, I believe in it that deeply, so thank you very much." And I think that was a great compliment. So, but I did want to spend a little bit of time just talking about the 3 areas on the scorecard that we still...
Nancy, before you do, I was a little flip in my excitement over keeping you around for a while. I think we actually need a real motion to accept the recommendations and findings of the subcommittee.
Oh, okay.
It's not just about you.
Okay, great, good.
So I'd like to move that we accept the evaluation and the recommendations of the subcommittee.
Second.
It's moved and seconded that we adopt the findings and recommendations of the subcommittee. Is there a discussion? Not objection, so ordered.
Okay, thanks. I did want to talk about the 3 areas on the scorecard that we still have to complete. And I think most of you know that I have my own scorecard that I'm accountable to. 4 times a year, I work with the management subcommittee to really fill out that scorecard. And there's 3 things on the scorecard that still need to be completed. I think with all 3 of these, we have to start fast and pump up the speed, as we say, because our children are waiting. But the first one is budgeting to outcomes. And I do want to say that today's motion and acceptance of the recommendation of the Outcome and Investment Subcommittee is going to help us a great deal. The governor's outlined the rest of the process, that he's going to come back to this group. We're going to do some prioritization. Then the next step is to have the governor present his budget, and then ultimately there will be a legislatively adopted budget that will contain many of these recommendations, so if not all of them. So we're in process around that, and that is really time specifics. The second one is the longitudinal database, and we're also in the middle of a process with a longitudinal database. We are the first major organization to use what we're called the staged approach with this database. I think it's really critical, and what that approach is about is you go to a certain stage, and when you've met all the requirements, then you get a piece of the funding, and you keep it till you go to another stage. And again, we're moving along with that, and I really want to appreciate the work of Peter Trumba in helping that happen. So the third area is really around a key focus on the transitions, and I would say we have been focused on the transitions, but what we've done now very recently is put together a strategic plan that shows precisely what are we going to do between birth and 3rd grade reading proficiency, and what are we going to do between high school and college. So today on your agenda you will hear my 3 colleagues talking about that, and those are the 3 things we have left to do, and we're really going to move to make sure we meet all of those 3 areas, and we do it effectively and efficiently.
Very good. Any questions for Nancy? Okay, the next agenda item is to talk about the key transitions. We'll start with Rob Saxton. Come up here. And I am going to hand the gavel over to Julia here at 2:15, so we'll see how far.
Okay,
Are
great.
you leaving your hand?
What? Yeah, I'm going to give, my knuckles are worn out.
Governor, members of the board, Chief Education Officer Golden, Rob Saxton, Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction, I thought we should have transition points incarnate in front of you since we're talking about that today. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about the work that we have taking place at the transition points between early learning and K-12 and K-12 and higher education or careers. And actually the conversation that took place out of the best practices and student transition subcommittee recommendations today read like a lot of the work that we've been working on and talking about, and so it's very reaffirming. And there's a lot that we can go through. There's a document under tab 4 in your folder that lays out the 2 different transition points and some of the very specific work, as Dr. Golden just talked about, that we have going on. And the way that we looked at this document was in the far left, the what of what we have going on. And if you wanted a real high-level overview of the different pieces of work, you could just go right down that column on the what and get a really big picture of what it is that we're talking about. And then more detail on why, who, progress, remaining work, and barriers within the document. And what we wanted to try to do here is give you a big picture of this overview of the policy and practice that we have underway and that we're working on. And certainly feel free to ask us questions as we go or when we're finished. And we'll get underway. So one of the most exciting components of our work is taking place in early learning. And it's really the transition from early learning into kindergarten. And as a superintendent in a school district, which I used to do, I always thought that we had to do the work from kindergarten until 3rd grade to make sure that students were readers. And that we had about 3.5 years of an emergency on our hands to make sure that the students were actually going to be able to be successful in school and they were going to be able to access content, that we had that much time to teach them to read. And that it was a huge challenge to get it done in that time frame. And since coming into this position and thinking about P20 in a really different way, and having the wonderful pleasure of working with Megan Irwin in early learning and John Rupley before her, that's not the case at all. And in fact, that we have a system that really starts at birth and takes us through 3rd grade and kind of beyond, but we want to say 3rd grade to make sure that we have readers, and that it really changes the dynamic of the work that we need to do in each part of that continuum from the time of birth until 3rd grade. And that we have a much greater advantage and different kinds of leverage than we've ever had before because we have a P through 20 system. And the same kinds of things exist at higher ed, but I'm going to stop there and hand it over to Megan to talk about some of the specifics on this component of the transition sheet, really from early child to K-12, but I wanted to make sure that we understand the opportunity that exists and that all educators in the state understand the opportunity that exists to ensure that we have students who are readers by the end of 3rd grade using the full continuum of time that's available to us. So, Megan.
Thanks, Rob. For the record, my name is Megan Irwin, and I'm the Acting Early Learning System Director. And I just want to reiterate that Rob and I are both just absolutely committed to making sure that children and families have an incredibly strong and smooth transition from whatever early learning experience they choose in the early years of life into kindergarten and the early years of elementary school. And I also just, before I get into the details here, have to highlight how cool it is that we actually have an early learning system in our state now that we can talk about connecting to the early years of elementary school. There's been tremendous effort over the last 4 years to build a more cohesive system, to have an early learning division for the first time in this state inside the Department of Education. Allows us to have this conversation now about what it means to align the early years of life to the early grades of elementary school, and that's a big deal that's worth highlighting. As Rob and I started thinking about what collaboration across that transition point should look like for us, we really felt like we needed to start by being clear about our aims for this shared work. And we really came up with 3 things that we think are critical to focus on as overarching goals for what we call P3 alignment when we're speaking in jargon. And those goals are, number 1, making sure that more children are on track at kindergarten entry in reading on grade level by 3rd grade. That is the North Star for the conversation that we're having about how to align these two systems. Second, we want to make sure that fewer children go with untreated developmental delays or health challenges, and that fewer children are chronically absent in early childhood programs and at kindergarten. And finally, we want to ensure that more children are in schools where race and income-based reading gaps are eliminated by 3rd grade. So those are the compass points for us in this work. And beyond creating that shared vision together, we've really come up with 3 key areas where our work around school readiness and kindergarten transition is shared. And right now, across the state, we're actually piloting all 3 of these approaches through our Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Fund. And I wanted to call out that both Dr. Curtis and Dr. Mulvihill are real leaders on the ground when it comes to this P3 alignment work. So thank you for what you're doing in your school districts and your communities. The first place where our work is shared is around aligning standards across early childhood into the early grades of elementary school. We think that this focus area is really important because child development is a continuous process. And if we had standards that are a little bit more aligned, and then instructional practices that are a little bit more aligned, the transition from a preschool or a high-quality childcare program into kindergarten and the transition from each grade up to 3rd grade will be a little bit smoother for our children, we think. In Oregon, we have adopted early childhood standards. We have adopted the Head Start Child Development Framework for 3 and 5-year-olds, and then articulated that down to 0 through 3-year-olds. And it's focused on all aspects of child development in early childhood. And so the next step here for us is to figure out what that means to articulate into standards for kindergarten through 3rd grade. The second area of shared work is around alignment of early screening and identification of needs that children might have in early childhood around potential developmental delay or disability. And then working together to make sure that we're actually connecting children who might have a developmental delay or a disability to interventions and supports that will help them be prepared at school entry and kind of address delays and disabilities earlier when there's a greater chance to make a big difference. In our focus on screening, I also want to just point out that even when a specific delay is not identified in early childhood, by really focusing on developmental and risk screening early, even when a delay isn't identified, we're able to have a conversation with parents and families about things that they can do as their child progresses to make sure that they're developmentally on track for school. And then the third place that we see our work as really shared is to align our practices and our approaches to child and family engagement from early childhood into kindergarten. We think that early childhood education, because we are so child and family focused, actually has a lot to bring forward into the early grades of kindergarten. And then to make sure really specifically that children and families who need a little bit of an extra boost before kindergarten are actually getting a lot of support from the early childhood community and from school districts in that summer before kindergarten, which I think you've heard Rob and I both talk about a lot. There is a lot more specificity on the details of these policy areas and the work that we're doing around them in the document, and we'll take questions after we're done with the presentation. But again, just want to highlight that this work around P3 alignment is new for Oregon. I think we're about a year into having a meaningful conversation about it, and it's been really exciting to watch it emerge at the department level and also on the ground with school districts that have really chosen to take this on.
This is great, and I love to see how in transition remaining work. It's just great how you articulated this in this plan. One thing, just food for thought, believe me, I know you know this within the engaging communities, but one thing I've learned in the hub work is how extensive the health aspect is from prenatal to 2. And also the safety element. And if we really look at 40-40-20, the CCO effort, all the things that we're trying to do to reduce silos, the hub to me is a microcosm where that opportunity is, where we can get DHS staff, we can get our health staff, public health, all of these entities together. And I guess I've been really overwhelmed with how much those dominate the hub at the early levels. It's not education. So I would just encourage, I know you know this, I'm preaching to the choir, but I would just encourage as you look at your goals that the integration of the health and safety aspect as well, at least coordinating that effort. Because at the local effort, I'm about ready to come to you, Megan, and say, I need some help with this health issue. I need some help with the safety issue that I think would align really well to your other goals.
I just want to give an enthusiastic yes to the points that you just made. And one thing that I think is potentially really exciting for the K-3 or the K-12 system is to use the early childhood system as a pathway into those conversations about health and social services, really, because the need for that doesn't stop at kindergarten entry. So this is a bit narrowly focused on more kind of academics, but I think health and social services for families as they're bridging into kindergarten and beyond is extremely important, and we're a potentially useful pathway into that for the K-12 system.
Like Rob, was our conversation we had with Aaron a couple of years ago. You know, it's just such a natural now that we grade resources in this hub.
Right, exactly.
Can I make one more comment? I just want to celebrate and appreciate the specificity of the work and the progress that's being made. It feels like a year ago there was still a lot of sort of cloud around us, and now being a school district that's ready to look at this stuff, had an opportunity to go to places where it's already happening, and to see things written down that, you know, even knowing the Head Start framework's been adopted, I've just been sort of waiting for that kind of guidance to say, okay, what should we do? Because we want to get going and we can't try to figure it out ourselves because we don't have the expertise or the time. And I just think you've made huge progress in getting really specific about that and giving us things to grasp onto so that we can accelerate our work quickly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I just wanted to say, piggyback on what Mark just said, we're not always talking to the choir. I think we've got the choir on board. It's a great opportunity to sell to the outside community what the return on investment is and what we're talking about. The simple thing about prenatal for 1,000 days, we've heard that, how difference that makes and stuff. But I think it's important that we are educating, using the word, to the whole community on why it's important to the business community, to all aspects of the community. And I think it's a missed opportunity if we keep that little secret to ourselves and inside the hubs and what have you. Because it's important for the whole community that DHS is going, that we don't have as many foster care. It's important that the education, and on and on and on and on. And we're in the business, I think, on selling the idea on why it's important for us to have the broad-based community can give us some wind behind our sails. So I think this is a great opportunity, and it's new. It's new to Oregon and the early learners.
Amen. I think Rob and I would both say amen to that.
Definitely.
So on that last, any indication of just the early response that we are getting from the broader community? It's great that we're getting our house in order, and I would echo the earlier comments. Very, very pleased to see our progress. It seems that of the three folks that we're hearing from, this is the area where we have an interface with so many state and non-state family, and it's just a very, very diverse group that you're attempting to interface with. What is the reaction to this from the broader community?
Yeah, so I think about the broader community in two spheres: people who provide services and then families who access them. And on the service provider side, the work that we've been doing in this area and also in connecting to health and human services, I think people are just saying, finally there's a table to have this conversation, there's space to have it, there's clarity about expectations around how it comes together. I can't tell you how many superintendents I've had the chance to talk to who have said things like, I had no idea where kids were before, now I'm starting to figure out how to find them. And how many child care providers I've talked to who have said for decades I've been trying to connect to the elementary school in my neighborhood, and now they're interested in me. So that feels like a really big deal. And then on the general public, the parents who access services side, I think we know from a lot of national polling that's been done that there's strong support for early childhood education, and people sort of intellectually understand why it's important. And a lot more work to do from the state, but also from our partners to actually get the word out about what it is we're doing. And I personally don't think that the state can do that alone. I think that it requires a lot of partnership from community-based organizations, et cetera, to actually really get the message out about what we're doing and why it's so important.
So I'm looking at the first page of the of the first matrix, and we talked about progress and its adoption of statewide standards and so forth. So as you think about statewide standards and these communities interacting with statewide standards, that could and should, I would imagine, start to elicit changes and form in some of those providers, and changes never easy. So how is that conversation unfolding, and what do you anticipate as statewide standards become part of the conversation with these providers?
I have some thoughts, and then I'm curious, what Rob thinks. I mean, standards are useful in that they help us understand what children should know and what they should know how to do at each stage of development. I think that the challenging part of that will be finding a way that early childhood providers are able to work in the same room and speak the same language as a kindergarten teacher or a first grade teacher. Because right now, early childhood people speak and think and behave really differently than K-12 people. And so I think probably Mark, who's
really
actually doing this in
one
his
another.
community. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So I think that's going to be the important work. Even more important than actually having the standards articulated is how do people behave differently together around them? And that work is so new. We're testing it out right now really in 6 communities around the state, and have been since August. So I don't feel prepared to extrapolate really big lessons learned from that. Mark and Yvonne may have some anecdotal thoughts on that, because they're both communities that we're piloting this work in. But I think that is the big question for me.
But also in here, one of the things that is listed is having some common staff development, where instead of saying we're gonna do some work here and we're gonna talk with kindergarten teachers and first grade teachers about how to engage around these standards in a really different way. Let's expand that out and start having some common staff development across early childhood and K-3, so that we get some commonality of thinking and training in that way. Because if you have these standards but your training is always separate, you're going to continue to have different thinking, ways of thinking and approaching. And so that's another important part of it, and it really saves you from having 2 separate things where everybody's working twice as hard as they ought to and not as well as they should. And so that's one piece of the work that we're trying to put together on that. At the K-3 level, our standards are really the earliest beginning of the college and career readiness standards, especially around English language arts and mathematics. And so we have a set of standards now, the Common Core standards, that really last from kindergarten all the way through grade 12, and making sure that those standards make sense from pre-kinder as students are moving forward. We used to think that students arrived at kindergarten and they were kindergarten ready or they were not. There was a gap or there wasn't, and then we just needed a deal. And that's not the case anymore. It is, how do we ensure that they're going to be more likely to show up kindergarten ready? And if these are the standards and what the expectations are for kindergarten, what should they be when a child is age 4 in order to get there? So, and the goals that are being set in early childhood that are targeting that are a really important part of the coordination there. And I would say the same then goes on to higher ed. How do we make sure that those really are college and career readiness standards, and the students are going to be successful as they move forward? So taking it to the other end of that.
And I would just say, what Rob said is extremely important. It sounds really academic, and I want to make sure that we all remember that when we're talking about this, it is developmentally appropriate, fun, play-based instruction, right, for in early childhood and carrying that into kindergarten.
So can I just make one more comment on what you said about what happens in the school districts? And it is when you put all those people together in the room, and their hearts and minds want to do the right thing for kids, and they all love little kids. Doesn't really matter if they're kindergarten, first grade, or whether they're 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds. They're all little ones, and people want to make a difference. And when you have standards for them to anchor the conversation in, you have this third thing out there that says this is what it should look like and feel like. Therefore, we don't have to argue about our little turfs or anything, but this is where we're all trying to go. And now, how are we all pointing? I mean, I'm watching that unfold in my In fact, I wrote down the question, what's the timeline? Because I know they're already having those conversations. In fact, somebody just sent an email in my district saying, I think there's Common Core state standards for preschool and 3-year-olds, but I can't remember where I saw them. And I'm thinking, yikes, maybe we should find out from the experts whether it's really Common Core or something else. But I know that they know how to have conversations around that. And that they all know that there is a sort of a professional language around that. And we just need to get them in the room. And things like the innovation grants are finally giving us those resources in order to put all those people in the room to have those conversations.
I sense that we're gonna shift soon to 11 to 14.
We're about to shift.
So unless somebody who hasn't spoken yet, Dr. Henry?
Just want to point out that we talk a lot about the family, but it's the whole community that benefits, and I'd like to draw our attention back to that. And there are several places around the state, and I know rattling Dick for his memory on this. We chaired the Oregon Commission on Children and Families. There were 2 around the state that I believe are continuing to do that with community, early childhood, family, and schools, and that's the Gladstone Center, which has been going about, what, 6 years now, something like that, and the High Desert Collaborative that we visited, Nancy, about a year ago, October, I think, where they've combined with the health facility at St. Charles Hospital and the early identification. So there's some pieces there that we can draw on, but my major point was this piece that it involves communities. Communities get the benefit, communities participate, and communities are more than happy to help bridge those pieces that we've treated in different spheres.
Excellent, exactly right. We ready?
Yep.
All right. I was
Proceed,
looking for approval to move to the other end of the continuum, really the 11 through 14 transition. And our vision at the top of this particular document is the transition to college career seamless and supported to advance 40-40-20. So we've had 5 different kind of buckets that we put these things in, and I wanted to go through a couple of these. And again, I don't want to cover each of them, but I thought I might point out one within each of the buckets to talk about really briefly, and then I'll hand it off to Ben. So the first one is to ensure that high school students are college and career ready. And the very first upper left-hand corner there is just implementing the college and career standards in all 197 school districts. And I think it's important for us to recognize and remember that the standards that we have, the Common Core standards in English language, arts, and math, were really developed in conjunction with higher ed to ensure that students were college and career ready when they participated in those standards in the K through 12 system. It is the absolute intent of those standards to make sure that we have a smooth transition. And the implementation of those standards has been underway across the state really since first adopted by the state board in 2010, and then more deeply over the course of the last year. As a couple different things happen. One of those is that there'll be an assessment against those standards this spring. And then also, since we were able to secure some resources from the legislature around deepening this work across all districts in the state, and districts have engaged in that themselves along the way. So that would be just one that I would cover there. The second is increased rates of student participation in grades 11 through 14, and I'll choose the upper left-hand box in that one too, and I know Board Member Brent Edwards would appreciate that. And that is to ensure more meaningful schedules for high school students, especially during their senior year. And I really appreciated the conversation earlier about, well, is it really just senior year or is it high school experience? And it really is high school experience. The work that you all did today around 9th grade on track is a really key indicator and a really key way to try to work and incent making sure that students are on track at the end of 9th grade, and then we would hope that they would have full schedules as they move through the system. And so we have some work there and going on there, and it is very important when it comes to success. We can't have students who don't take math or science as a senior show up to college 16 months later at the earliest, and then can't pass an entrance exam and end up in developmental ed, and then we're off into an area that's going to make it hard for them to be successful in that transition. The third would be increase accelerated learning opportunities and improve outcomes. I'll go to the bottom left-hand corner box in that, create more opportunities for high school teachers to teach courses for college credit. And it really is about knowing that students are taking courses that are truly college level, that the content is college level. I think the Eastern Promise is a really excellent example of that work. And that once students begin to earn college credits, see that they have the capability to do that work, they don't want to give them away. I have them, I want to continue on, I know I can be successful, and I'm going to use these to catapult myself into the remainder of the college system.
So for the record, Ben Cannon, Executive Director of the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, I think. I will cover categories 4 and 5 and then make some concluding remarks, and we should have some opportunity for discussion. So categories 4 and 5 on the grades 11 through 14 continuum. Category 4, bucket 4, align curricular pathways between K-12 and post-secondary. And I want to highlight a couple from this list. The top line is one that you had some discussion on earlier as you talked about the recommendations from the best practices and student transition subcommittee. It is to encourage the use of that 11th grade assessment for placement or as an alternative to other existing assessments for placement in college level courses. And I think the discussion earlier touched both on some of the reasons for doing this and some of the imperative for doing, but also some of the concerns around timing and understanding that we can feel quite confident about that 11th grade exam and likely additional 12th grade work on the part of the student in order to essentially exempt them from college-based exams for placement into high school writing and math courses. The third line down, so this is on the next page, align math course outcomes from high school to college. So the primary bugaboo, although not the only one in this bucket of aligning curricular pathways, is math. That is the place where far more students get hung up as they transition than any other. And the work here involves examining the relationship between Algebra 2, which is the standard requirement now for high school diplomas, and the related college expectations. Typically, Math 95 is the prerequisite for standard college level math, which is Math 111. And lo and behold, that Math 95, Math 111 sequence doesn't appear perfectly aligned with the high school requirement of Algebra 2. So the effort here and the potential is for adjustments on either side, adjustments related to the high school diploma requirement and Algebra 2, adjustment related to the potential adjustment related to the college math expectations around Math 95 and 111, and there's some sort of additional articulation of that as we talk about potential new math pathways for non-STEM majors within college on the next line, and I won't go into that now, but I'm happy to in follow-up. The final bucket in this alignment of grades 11 through 14 is focused on developmental education. I appreciate the attention that the OEIB has begun to pay to this topic. I want to be clear that actually our goal here is to eliminate developmental education. If we were wildly successful with our work on alignment of grade 11 through 14, and frankly our work on aligning early learning in K-12 and work within the system, we would not have students showing up for college not ready to do college level work. But given that we will continue to expect that there will be some, and we have many returning adults who maybe haven't been in the system for years and years, developmental education remains a significant part of what community colleges in particular do. The three items that are listed here were pulled from a report that community college faculty, administrators, with facilitation and leadership from the Community College and Workforce Development Agency have put in a report that recommends a variety of ways to improve the practice, instruction, and success of developmental education. I'll just highlight, so that work took place last year. Now community colleges are beginning to implement, again with support from CCWD and the HEC, are beginning to implement these recommendations. The second line here I'll highlight is to create accelerated developmental education options. These can involve the co-enrollment of students in developmental ed and credit-bearing courses at the same time, and a variety of other tools to move students more quickly into college level work, quickly and appropriately. in order to increase their likelihood of attainment of a certificate or degree. So I guess I would just, in conclusion, stress that this lens, this focus on the student transitions, the early learning to grade 3, the 11 to 14 is an important one. It clearly is central to the OEID's work and is also central to our work. The emphasis that we've placed around this work would not exist without the leadership of our Chief Education Officer, without the board. Left to our own devices, I'll speculate that Rob and I, and perhaps Rob and Megan, would not be sitting at this table side by side and speaking about shared work. That's something that results when we have a Chief Education Officer and a board demanding it and expecting it. And so I think it is easier not to do this. I say that in part to acknowledge the barriers and some of the challenges, which we've tried to call out, at least in part, in the final column here. And those are challenges and barriers that, some of which I think this board's attention and leadership and leaning in can help us to address, can at least hold our feet to the fire so we can go to the folks with whom we work, our staff, our stakeholders, and say, this is the expectation that the state of Oregon, the governor, his Oregon Education Investment Board, or Chief Education Officer, have for us. And so appreciate the opportunity to begin to share the efforts with you today and look forward to continuing in the conversation.
Thank you.
Problem.
Hannah?
Questions?
The last comment kind of threw me a little bit, because I certainly hope that we're really engaging those who are working in our high schools and K-12 and community college higher ed in the conversation. If we think we have all the right answers sitting here or sitting there, then I think that's wrong, and I really hope that we're not pushing these things to say, we've said you should do it, so you should do it. I think that's really wrong, but I hope that isn't what you were saying. I want to go to number 1, the first bucket, on the standards. And it talks about 80% of teachers leave their curriculum lines. I just want to make sure that we point out that over 50% of the educators give a failing grade for the implementation of the Common Core standards. So there are some real issues that we're having with the Common Core and the implementation of the Smarter Balanced Assessment. And I know that there are some districts who are going to be asking for, through the compacts, to not use the Smarter Balanced Assessment. And I think it makes great sense that you wouldn't use it since you don't have any baseline data to show how you're setting your targets with a test that you've never done before, and we don't have any feedback from the pilots from last year. So in this one, the implementation of these standards, I hope that we can, again, take a breath and really focus on the assessments that our educators are using every day to inform their instruction. Because if we don't do that, then the students that are moving through, and now, we've always had standards, pretty good standards, and now we have the Common Core, and they're more rigorous. We're looking at actually critical thinking, which is great. But as we implement them, if educators aren't given the time to create the assessments and then actually utilize those assessments, then their instruction will not be informed by where their students actually are. And that will take some time and a focus by us. And again, I go back to the work that we're doing to create a system of assessments in Oregon. But I really believe this is an area that is extremely important for us to get it right and not to go fast, go slow to get it right with our students now on this issue. So I encourage you to make sure that's thoughtfully considered as you move forward.
Thank you, and if just a couple really quick things. One of them, I understood what Ben was talking about with sort of the push about getting some things done, right? And so I think there are two things that I often hear when I come in front of, or I'm at these meetings and I listen to you all talk. And some of it is about the work that you hope that we will accomplish. And then also I hear a lot about how we should go about accomplishing that work. And there's not a meeting that we come to that I don't hear at least a number of you say, and I hope that you'll involve the people who are right at the ground level in the work. And so that resonates, and I appreciate that you followed up with that. We'll keep that at the front of mind as we do the work. And the other part is there really are 3 kinds of assessment that we have ongoing right now that I hope is all aligned to the Oregon state standards, whatever those standards happen to be and how they were developed. And that is the classroom assessments that take place on a regular basis that we would call formative, so that teachers know where their students are currently and how to alter and improve their instruction to move every student in their class forward in their learning. And then the interim assessments that are over time, that are a little bigger aggregate of work so that they can do the same. And it really, when it comes to teaching and learning, those 2 assessments are kinds of assessment are incredibly important. And we need to make sure that we're doing great staff development and work with and supply support for high-quality assessments in those arenas as we do our work. And then the third one, the summative assessment, that really is a snapshot in time around here's where this group is collectively, big picture, basically at the end of each instructional year, and how it looks like this district or this school are performing with their students. And that those are all important components as we think about policy and the work that we need to do. When it comes to teaching and learning on a daily basis, formative and interim, extremely important. And I think that we cannot support that work enough.
Sam?
I want to support what Rob was just saying, and from the state board perspective, if I may be so bold as the chair of that to speak, there are 2 points I'd like to make. One, I'd like to push back against the piece that there's been a failure of the Common Core. We've conceptualized the Common Core as the floor, not the ceiling. And the difference between those 2 perspectives is that the Common Core gives us something to stand on and a way to approach some of the ways we want to do things better. We do not feel that we have been, in the past, always aiming for higher. And that has been a part of the reason that the Common Core was voted on in 2010, and that we are working out how we implement the Common Core. The assessments for it have been developmental. And as most of you know, there has been a year in which the assessment, the Smarter Balance, has been the assessment we chose for it, has been developed to meet the particular needs of Oregon in terms of teaching the Common Core. I agree with Hannah that we need to be very, very inclusive about it. I believe we've had the kind of process that can do that, and I professionally strongly resist backing away from those goals that we set out. I think to back away from them indicates that we are turning our back on some important kinds of things. And I think we've settled for the softness too many times in the past.
Any other comments or questions?
If my comment was taken to mean soften up, then it was misinterpreted, because that's not at all what we're saying. We're saying, get it right. We've got to use the assessments appropriately. The implementation of the Smarter Balance this year, before we have actually provided our students the opportunity to scaffold that learning, is not appropriate for students. And there's a strong urging from educators across the state that we should be using those formative and interim assessments that Rob so eloquently spoke to. Those are key to learning. But what we've done is we've invested so much time, energy, and money. We're rating our schools on whether they pass this test. Students don't have any chance. 65% we project will pass the test. So why would we not put in place assessments that allow educators to provide the instruction and get our students to be successful in those standards before we drop in and just force them to take that? And then we just said that Secretary of Education has just shared that he's not going to rate teachers by those. Well, that's all well and good and appreciated, because there's no research anywhere that shows that those tests should be used for that. But they shouldn't be used to rate our schools, and they shouldn't be used to rate our students, and that's why we're standing up and saying, let's get it right. Let's take the time, instead of using these tests as a punishment, let's use them as a learning tool. Let's use assessments appropriately.
You know, I'd agree with several aspects, and and kind of push back on a few others, Anna, but basically, when I look at the Smarter Balance, I've had the privilege to take a look at what's really in the digital library for the formative assessments. And there has been a great deal of work by multiple states to create that digital library for the formative assessment, and I really believe that's going to really empower teachers to access research-based best practices and align that into their Common Core curriculum. I think over time that's going to be a great professional development activity. I look at the interim assessment package of Smarter Balance as well. This is going to give our districts the opportunity to practice and see what it looks like this first year. So, you know, maybe the answer a little bit is, rather than or, is more of an and, in that when we look at the Common Core, when we look at the Smarter Balance, there's no question we are raising the rigor and the expectations for our kids, which is a good thing. However, then it becomes, what about the accountability and the quote punishment aspect? Rob, it's my understanding when you came out to our region that you, the report card next year, will take that into account, that there's going to be an alignment between Oaks benchmarks and SBAC benchmarks, and it's not going to punish districts. Is that correct?
Board Member Proposal, that is correct. There are a couple different pieces of that, and it's work that we'll need to have underway as we look at the results of the field tests that we did this year. We had about 28,000 assessments that were given in Oregon this year. There were about 2.9 million assessments given across the nation in the Smarter Balance field test. But we'll need to look at those results and then the results that we get from the upcoming assessment this spring. And it's our intent to do a leveling between the old Oregon Assessment of Knowledge and Skills and the new Smarter Balance assessment that say, here are the scores that equate one to another. We could do that if we were talking about just like the ACT and the SAT. They could say, ACT would say our college readiness benchmark is I don't remember the number anymore, 27?
27.
Is a 27, and the SAT would say our college readiness benchmark is a 1500 or something like that. And those two things, therefore, are roughly equal, even though they're really different numerical systems. And we can do that between Oaks and Smarter Balance. We can say, here's the equivalency score between these two. When we start talking about rating schools, in the system that we have in Oregon right now, every year, 5% of our schools will be rated a level 1. 10% will be rated a level 2. 10% will be rated a level 5, and then roughly from 16% to 30, let's see, I think it's 49% are rated level 3, and then the rest are rated level 4. And so regardless of the assessment that's used, the rating will be based on a percentile basis as opposed to what percent of your students met or not. It's comparative. It's a normative kind of rating. And so we can do that normative rating, and we can also do a comparator between Smarter Balance and Oaks. I have a little concern when we start talking about this and we start talking about a different piece of this as opposed to rating districts or schools. But students and their meeting the essential skills, we need to be able to do that there as well. There could be a roughly 0.3% or 1 point sort of margin in the work that we do. We'll make sure that we give that margin to the student and say that they met the essential skill if there's a question, until we have an opportunity to refine that over the course of 2 years.
How do we put this in the context? Are these national ratings that we have that we find ourselves in the bottom 10%? Are they, we forget about that, or what have you? I mean, so
Nick, when you say bottom 10, you're talking graduation rate?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what I'm sure. All I know is the headlines is, here's a very important institution in the nation that goes in here and says, well, actually, we're worse than that. And, what's the balance here? I mean, if you walk out of this room and go downtown, that's what you're asked. I don't know, maybe some of us live in shelters, but...
Great question, Board Member Ruth. One of the things that has been done with the Common Core as a set of standards, and it's really important to separate out the Common Core and then the test that's used to see how well students are doing against the Common Core, which we're calling Smarter Balance. But the Common Core has been adopted by over 40 states, and somewhere between 40 and 45 states. And so we have a fairly similar set of standards in just 2 areas, English language arts, reading, and math. And then when it comes to the assessment, the Common Core assessment, I believe 19 states currently have adopted the Smarter Balance as their assessment. We've never had an assessment like that in Oregon before that takes what all students in the state that we're targeting for them to learn, where we could actually take our assessment and compare it to any other state in the nation. So sometimes when I see these comparisons, I want to know what scale are they using? How have they contrived this mark? Even sometimes with our graduation rates, well, we know that for a while we were not counting students who got a modified diploma, and other states were. Or we weren't counting, we had this fifth-year program proliferation. Well, how do we get that? How do we compare apples to apples? This is a place now we're going to be able to compare apples to apples. We're going to be able to look at our smarter balanced results and other states' smarter balanced results and say, here's where we are in this continuum of 19 states.
It's the first time we've had that we're invested in. We have NAEP.
We do.
But districts are not invested in NAEP, nor is it aligned to the Oregon content standards. This is the first time coming up here where we are really going to accurately say this is our curriculum, K through 12. This is our assessment that we're buying into. Let's take a look at all of these other states and really see. This will be the first time it's apples to apples. So we'll really see if we're down to the bottom 10%.
And it's all kids.
And may I just add that it's a snapshot in time. It's a one-time test. So if that student didn't have breakfast in the morning and we're the second hungriest state in the nation, what does that mean? How do you think that student's going to fare? And as we look at do universities use these high-stakes standardized tests for admittance? No. Are they correlated to a student's success? No. But we keep pretending that we're using them in the right way. It's wrong. We shouldn't be. Look at our funding for higher ed in Oregon. 47, 48 in higher ed funding. Class size, we're like second from the bottom in class size across the nation. Our telesurvey shows 27% of the educators agree that they have a class size that they can meet the needs of their students. And yet we're going to proceed, and failure to students matters. They take the test and they fail, and it matters to them. Talk to Rick Stiggins about, does it matter? An assessment guru that we should be listening to. So we're setting them up for failure on a test. And again, we don't have to do it. We don't have to proceed. The Secretary of Education may say, if you don't do this, we're going to take your money away. Well, take the money away. Really? Are you going to really stand up and take Title I money away from Oregon students when we're dealing with everything that we have and the disinvestment in public education? Why don't we stand up and say, we're going to create a system of assessments, and I really hope we do, and I appreciate the work we're doing in this realm, but we've got to stand up. Our students need us now to do that. And it is our opportunities as leaders in Oregon to actually say, we're not going to use these tests inappropriately. We're going to use assessments the way they're meant to be used, and we're going to provide a quality education where students get immediate feedback, where they're actually learning, and we're not spending millions and billions of dollars on these tests where people are making a profit.
I just wanted to, not to address the...
Just before you...
Oh, he can go ahead. No.
Ben and David, and then I think we're going to try and wrap up, just stay on schedule.
Not to address the larger issues and questions around the Smarter Balance test, but just a piece of the way it's called out here is for its potential use to help with college placement of students who are entering from high school. I just wanted to note that the state of Washington last week announced that its community college system and its public universities are waiving their placement tests for students who achieve certain scores on their 11th grade summative test, Smarter Balance, in conjunction with doing certain specified additional work in 12th grade. And I think there are some very reasonable questions about Smarter Balanced and a sort of time frame for its use and implementation. But I guess I'd put myself in the mindset of a student who takes that test in 11th grade, does really, really well, shows that they've essentially mastered the college and career ready standards in math, for example, goes on and takes a math course in 12th grade as required under that Washington rubric, and then shows up, or under the Oregon system, then shows up in an Oregon community college or public university and is presented with an entirely different assessment in their first week before they've begun class. It's been at least 3 or 4 months since they've taken a math class,
Okay, where to start now? I'll try to be brief, I'll try to go, yeah. No, I think Hannah brings up some important points about using multiple measures and not just relying, especially on one new test that's going to take really several years to phase in, and really several years of students going through the new Common Core standards to really be, I think, up to par on, not to put too many stakes on that. And I mean, that's maybe something for a future agenda, is talking about some multiple measures, how we're assessing success in K through 12. Because you're right, we don't really rely a lot on especially one or two standardized assessments when you're talking about success at college or university. And I wish we had, and I'd like to see it on the agenda for the next meeting, because we talked about this briefly in the subcommittee earlier, the transition subcommittee. It was a very, very rough draft about using Common Core in lieu of the existing placement test for colleges. So mind you, it's a very rough draft. It was more considerations rather than any recommendations. But I'd like to see us look at that draft for the next agenda on this meeting, because I think it's important to this, because I know this college uses the compass. It's basically, I think, for English and math, that's strictly what they're looking at. Are you up to those standards to enter college? And I mean, I don't think anybody's dedicated. That's some test provided by a corporation, and I'm hoping the report goes more into detail about how that's not entirely accurate, we found. So I think it's something we can be open to, and particularly looking at how that aligns with colleges. You know, Megan really mentioned something when she was talking about early learning, the K through 12, how the two sectors act differently, behave differently, really think differently. And I think that's something we haven't really talked a whole lot. Sometimes it kind of comes up in subtext on this board or in other things we're doing, but the way K through 12 talks and the way post-secondary talks, it's really a different kind of thinking. And you know, I'm really struck by when we're talking about seamless system. There are a lot of seams, there are a lot of hurdles, barriers, small bumps, you know, they all vary in how big they are between the two sectors, and that's something we should be looking at and working on. I am encouraged by some of the work done, and it's not really reflected so much in this chart, but with working on new outcomes and methods in developmental ed, for example, making it more relevant to students, making it fit in better with their path at college, and hopefully getting more students moving out of developmental ed and into college level courses. I'm encouraged by the math faculty that have come across the state and are actually looking at some other alternatives to Math 105 or Math 111 or Math 95, that whole path there is the math requirements required. And still we've got to work on aligning curriculum between high school and college, and I hope we work on that, and that's something we could be calling for on this board and future agenda with some concrete recommendations for that. So I'd like to see us move something maybe in the direction that I believe was the HEC as a report they've approved on aligning some common transfer courses across the college curriculum, the common course numbering they're calling it. And I think something like that could also be done. I'll say it really, we do need to bring together both regionally and at the state level the people in education, in K through 12 and in college. They think differently, they have different ways of approaching this. I know some people think the ivory tower colleges, they're never going to change. They do. They know what the pressures out there are. They know, students aren't succeeding. But it does take maybe a little bit longer, a lot of talking through, a lot of processing. That's just the system. And go back to University of Heidelberg in the 15th century. You probably see the beginnings there, but nonetheless, that's the system we have. I think it works really good. There's nothing I think's really been done in education top down that's been entirely successful. And I think if we learn from that, we'll be a lot stronger. So I call for that, this board to be fleshing out some of these and really going with some concrete recommendations that do involve bringing the two sectors together, because I think we're really seeing our development as a board working more on transition. So I'll leave it at that.
Great. Is there anyone else? I know when you were speaking, Dr. Golden was making a note of your request for future discussion. So I guess I just have a couple closing comments and just one. I'm going to start with just a quick definitional question. In the reference in here to dual credit, I'm assuming that's just not exclusively dual credit with the community colleges or university, but also would include AP and IB. It may, just for clarity, since we had the definitional document that was sent out by Hilda that had dual credit defined in one particular way, to use a more universal term versus dual credit. So I have two comments. One, to make this, I think this is a great start of mapping out the links and the transitions, some that are seamless and some that need to be made more seamless. One thing that I think would be helpful is to have, there's a column of remaining work that doesn't have any particular time element to it. That just to go back to, from a student and a family perspective, especially when you get into the 11 to 14 time period, I'd like to know if that work's going to happen this year or several years out, because each of those years that doesn't happen for some students who are paying for college credit or for college classes and not getting credit. That's money right out of their pocket. So I'd like to know what the time frame is on some of these and having a sense of urgency. And then the second issue is more coming out of the discussion that came up is I haven't heard anybody within the system talk about Smarter Balance being used as a tool to punish districts or individual students. So I'm interested in sort of probably Rob, most your perspective of how you see that as a tool to help districts and students versus as a tool for punishment, because I haven't heard it in the discussions of how do we use this data. So how do you perceive, when you get that first round of information and you do all the calibration with Oaks, how will you use it in terms of, in relation to both schools and then how the conversation and discussion happens in the broader community, so students and their parents have an understanding of what that means?
Yeah. So if, assuming everything continues on as we currently have this lined up, we would give the Smarter Balance assessment this spring. And then we would get back the results relatively quickly, probably about as quick as we've ever gotten any back, as far as, because there's a number of extended responses and work samples and that kind of thing that are contained within Smarter, different than Oaks where it was just all multiple choice. So we'll get those results back compiled. We'll be able to come out and say, this is what it looked like comparatively within the sort of 5%, 10%, 5% being a 1, next 10% being a 2, and so on when it comes to schools and school ratings. And so our timeline should be the same for that as it has previously been when we had Oaks. And so one of the fortunate things that we have that's happening this year is that by virtue of the way that we've gone about identifying what we call focus and priority schools. So priority schools are the schools that are Title I schools, are the lowest 5% performing in the state. They're level 1 Title I schools. How's that? We identified a group of those schools 3 years ago. And those schools currently have been receiving support. This is the third year of support. And so they are identified as a level 1, and we can think about what that communicates and whether or not that's punishment or identification. Depends on how we want to talk about it. And then we've set out to provide support for those level 1 schools. And it really has been providing them with a coach, identifying issues that were keeping them from having a higher level of student achievement, and trying to figure out how to put together a plan and what work they could do, and then additional money that went to those schools and so on in order to work to try to have them exit that level 1 status. We had approximately 91 focus and priority schools that were identified in that first round of doing that work, and the majority of those schools have since exited that status, and we're only in the beginning of the 3rd year. So after 2 years, the majority, I think 60% of those schools have exited either level 1 or level 2 status, which is, I think, really great, right? So identified, focus some work on it, getting better outcomes with students than they had been previously. There's still some schools that were, all those schools are continuing to receive support. When we give the assessment this spring and the results are done, no schools will be newly identified as priority or focus, because it is a 4-year commitment to support those schools. So in the first year of implementation, schools will be rated as a level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, but there will be no new focus and priority schools identified. Then we'll have that will be the 4th year of support. The following spring will be the 2nd round of assessment. And assuming that the waiver looks similar from the US ED, which they'll come out with a new set of waiver identified requirements basically this winter. Assuming those look similar, I would think that 2 years from now, the second time that we deliver this assessment, it could mean that some schools would be identified then as focus and priority once again in the state, and would begin to receive support, but that wouldn't happen until the 2nd year of implementation of SMARTER. And then we would be right back into the level of providing support. If we have some schools who have been identified as focus and priority previously, in this previous round, that still do not exit focus and priority status 2 years from now, then we need to make some decisions about how we're going to interact with those schools, what kind of supports or decisions we're going to make about what we're going to do in relationship to the fact that there are still fairly low levels of student achievement in those schools. So I don't know if that answered precisely, but it's a little detailed, I apologize, but it's the only way I could kind of get to the explanation.
And just looking at the time, I'm going to wrap up unless you have anything else that you felt you needed to add.
Just, this is really fun work, and I feel very fortunate to have these people sitting on either side of me as we do this work, and really appreciate the direction that you all provide with us and the opportunity to think about how we create a system for kids that's going to help them achieve every success that they're capable of. So thank you for the work that you all are doing.
Thank you. So, Hannah?
Yes. So, letters go home saying every school's failing, money's taken away, principals are fired, educators are fired, regardless of how the parents feel about the school that their children are going to. There's punishments that come with these tests. I encourage you to talk with educators who have been subjected to this and our students, so they understand, because they understand that it's testing and punishing and all that's important.
So thank you. Next, we're going to move on to the public testimony. And before we actually have the public testimony, I just want to mention to everybody that for the public record, there's 2 pieces of public testimony in the back of your binders that was sent by email, one from Apano and the second from Pat Mueller from Oregon Save Our Schools. So if you can make sure and review that in addition to the people we have signed up today. So we have a number of people signed up today, and I'll just start with the first one on the list, and just a reminder of 3 minutes. Mary Whitmore.
Thank you very much. I'm a retired teacher. I have researched reading instruction in Oregon for 10 years. I'm from Forest Grove. I want explicit phonics taught first in kindergarten. Oregon's 29% decade-old illiteracy rate is intolerable and cannot be a precursor to 40-40-20. I would like to invite Megan Irwin to tour Mitch Charter School in Tigard with Dr. Dapo and I soon, and I would appreciate her reflection given to the board. I am requesting mediation and reconciliation with Dr. Curtis because we have personal conflicts that are an obstacle to my volunteering in our schools. I can help children learn to read and write, and there's no good reason that I shouldn't be allowed to. I would like the OEIB to consider appointing ex officio members because some of us come to a lot of these meetings and we care a lot and we want to communicate and encourage our peers. For instance, if somebody comes to 6 OEIB meetings and can write an essay or draw a picture about how they can make a contribution, they could be a non-voting ex officio member. OEIB has the power to order superintendents to use explicit phonics first in kindergarten. I want to remind you it's free after teacher training. I want to see what the first Smarter Balanced assessment, because it should be done probably in the first month of school. That's the initiative, initial, or you called it another name.
Formative.
Pardon me?
Formative.
Well, when I first investigated Smarter Balanced, I think they called it initial, formative, and summative. And it's supposed, the initial and formative are supposed to help teachers tweak their lessons so they can get to the goal by their formative assessment. So Smarter Balanced initial assessment should have been done right about now, and I would like to see a copy of that. Dr. Henry, you're on, whoops, you're on the PSU Board of Trustees, as well as the State Board of Ed and OEIB, and I'd like all Oregon universities to train teachers in explicit phonics. How am I on my time? 5 seconds. 3rd grade is too late. Explicit phonics students can read by the end of kindergarten. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list is Jim Anderson.
Hi, I'm Jim Anderson, industrial engineer from Stanford, and worked my professional life in systems analyst and statistical quality control. And for the last 15 years I worked with King School a lot, which is the bottom #1 category. And I see the children needing an emphasis on them themselves, that they are taught at their own level, at the zone of proximate development. And this is very difficult to do in the classroom where you're teaching curriculum. And I feel that one-on-one tutoring is necessary to get the kid up to a level where he can learn from the curriculum. The curriculum can be excellent, but if the child isn't at a level where he can understand it and learn from it, if it's out of his zone of proximate development, he'll never be able to get into the pipeline of passing. And I see so much how especially the younger kids in kindergarten and 1st grade, they respond to the curriculum in a rebellious and stony way when they can't understand it. But if you get down to their zone of proximate development, they suddenly start laughing and hugging and want to be the teacher. It's so obvious that they can learn at a lower level than the curriculum. And so this one-on-one tutoring, I think, is so necessary for us to help these children get to a level where they can learn the curriculum.
Thank you. Next is Anna Olivia Luzo Anglo.
Palazzo.
Sorry.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Anna Olivia Palazzo Angula from the Salem Kaiser Coalition for Equality, and I'm really excited to be here. I've enjoyed listening to all of you for the first time. I'm talking today about the ELL funding policies that have been proposed to go forward into the next part of, the details being worked out. But I just want to emphasize that the most important part of those policies that are being put forward is the accountability, and it's really going to be important that the accountability be tight. We need consistent coding in a state budget. We need clear measurements and requirements and consistent across all districts and comparing apples to apples. And this needs to be data-driven measurements, both in how the dollars are spent as well as what the achievement results are. And make it easier for districts to report. In my 15 years of advocacy, that was the biggest complaint I heard, was how difficult it was to figure out what belonged in the ELL money and what did not. And every district had different reporting obstacles. The next thing I wanted to talk about is really important to me is the removing obstacles for funding to be given directly to community-based organizations. Community-based organizations, CBO, and then the culturally specific organizations, CSO, for the sake of me not taking too long and saying every one of those titles. I think the most important reason for removing those obstacles to CBOs is to eliminate the disparities for CSOs, cultural specific organizations, and the disparities in the kids, which is not just education, but this researcher identified 28 disparities in our community that our community of color faces. Education, of course, is going to lead to reducing this greatly. The reasons culturally specific organizations have grassroots programs that may work better than generic programs that are designed for all children, and culturally specific CBOs provide services to the constituents, to their own community, because they represent the community, because they were constituents and or understand what it is to be a constituent. And they can be vetted and assured of security in using funding and not wasting or going, I don't know how to say it, but just the things that prevent people from wanting to fund them. And we do face a lot of obstacles, our own disparities in funding and our staff incomes. We get less benefits, less major donor. It's harder to fundraise, less likely to be sustainable. If we could count on CBOs being funded at the same level of recognition, then am I done? Yeah.
Go ahead and finish it. Go ahead and finish
Then
your
we
thought.
could, we would be at the same sustainable level, because we need to eliminate the disparities that we have in recruiting funding in order to do the special work we do with the kids. And I think that we have the highest level of passion and sacrifice and how do I say, the complete devotion of the staff not wanting to ever quit no matter how low their benefits are. And, very inclusive. So I just want to read one quote and I'll be done, okay? At the summit that we were at, it was a really great quote. The system stays the same even if the results are poor. So how are we really changing things? Portland Public Schools working collaboratively with other agencies, the summer reading, the dual credit, working with the community can get you there. We see that in Salem also. This was from an article of who gets to graduate. It was comments. And then districts may have very effective instruction in general, but they're working to improve all the students in parallel, and it's really difficult to eliminate the gaps. If you change the trajectory, you're going to have to be intentional and put more money into the ones that are behind to close those gaps. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Casey Jama.
Good afternoon, and my name is Casey Jama, and thank you very much for having me. I'm the executive director of the Center for Intercultural Organizing, a grassroots organization working to build a multiracial, multi-ethnic movement for American refugee rights. We're also a member of the Coalition of Community of Color, CCC. First of all, I wanted to let you know that I actually am a father. I have a 4.5-year-old twins who are going to be entering on the education system next year. So I have, stake of the game, and I've been an advocate since 2000 for education, for particularly the EL students. I have no doubt in my mind that we're all caring about Oregon education system. I want to make sure that we all achieve the 20, 25, 40, 40, 20. We all know that. I think that's important, and we need to, in order to get there, then the issue will be addressing the issues of ELR students. Our community has been fighting for equity on ESL for more than 25 years. And we have never seen this level of attention given to the ELR outcome, so we greatly appreciate for this attention. We appreciate ODE and also Oregon Education Investment Board is developing quality and recommendations to support focus on urgent on ELL kids in our public schools. We have seen too many children language and ESL programs. That's not a good for our community. We are not receiving these kids given education that they need. There have been ongoing civil rights issues within the EL for years. The graduation rate speaks itself, as you know. 49% of the EL students graduate in high school, and that's not acceptable. And it's not acceptable to us as a community, and I'm sure it's not acceptable to you. Although we're investing one of the highest on the EL department and across the country, over $160 million a year in 2013, 2014. We need to track the resources where they're going. And I think, as Anna Olivia said, that has been some ongoing issue with our community. I think if we're investing something, we need to know where those dollars, right? If you're giving me $100 as a community-based organization, every agency who gives me money, they would know every day how I spend and where I spend. And I think that's a simple baseline that we can ask our school board, and creating a systematic way across the board. So one group does not report one way, another school board does not report one way, but creating a systematic way. We also support the OED recommendation of being forwarded to Governor Kisaba, and look forward to seeing them in his budget for recommendations for 2015-2017. As I said, our goal is to go to and achieve 25, 40, 40, 20. And this, what you are doing, the forward recommendation budget to the governor, is the right direction. But again, I want to emphasize we need to track those resources. And I am also aware of this host of other reasons why we're having those graduation rates. But I think today issue is the money, and I would like to see that happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kathy Wall. Sorry.
It's okay.
I was wondering about that. I didn't see a dot.
So hello, members of the Oregon Education Investment Board. My name is Kathy Way, and I am a community organizer with APANO, the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon. We are Oregon's largest and oldest advocacy and policy organization, working to ensure equity for over 220,000 Asians and Pacific Islanders statewide. So I'm here today to basically provide a narrative, both a personal and a community narrative, for why we need to have better outcomes for our English language learners here in the state. And also, having been a product of Oregon's public education system, this is an issue that I personally hold very dear to my heart, and I know that my family would be proud of me today to, provide this testimony to advocate for our community members. So our Asian and Pacific Islander communities have been fighting for years for better outcomes for our English language learners. This is a top priority for Apano in the 2015 legislative session. And I want to just thank the work of ODE and your board for approving the recommendations concerning ELL. This is work that we've been doing for quite some time now, and we hope to just sort of to work better in partnership with you moving forward. So as someone who's worked directly with ELLs before, particularly refugee students, these kids basically come to this country with nothing but hopes and dreams. They've escaped war-torn countries, and the only opportunity that they have surviving here is through education. We know that we can all give our kids, regardless of nationality, citizenship, race, or ethnicity, equal opportunity to a quality public education in Oregon. As our organization, Apano, supports strong, diverse, and engaged families. The simple fact is that many of these students are the first in their family to attend an American education system, such as myself and my family. However, their chance for success is greatly diminished if they are not afforded appropriate language-based education. Additionally, the family unit also suffers as a whole when the doors of education are closed due to barriers in language. This severs the opportunities not only for the student, but for the entire family as well. So in closing, I'm just here to support and applaud your work that you're doing with many of our coalition of community partners. I myself is here from Apano, and Casey just testified. And again, we want to be able to collectively improve better outcomes for our kids through more accountability, just measure metrics. And we hope that we can continue to work with you in the future to help improve these outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Steve Buell.
My name is Steve Buell, and I'm one of the founders of Oregon Save Our Schools, who I'm talking for today. I'm on the Portland School Board, and I'm going to reference a couple things they're doing in Portland, but I'm not speaking for the Portland School Board in any way. I've been sitting here for over 3 years, probably, since the very beginning, and we've been following carefully the very beginning up until now, the directions that the OEIB has gone. They made a lot of early errors, not the least of which was buying into the Oregon Business Association's educational program. But you're actually starting to get a little bit better, really doing some things that seem to be making sense. But you're still making the same major error that hurts what you're trying to do over and over and over again. A man by the name of Rex Hagans, who's an Oregon Save Our Schools member, and a man by the name of Tom Olson, who was recently deceased, who was a good friend of mine, and also in Oregon Save Our Schools, and I sat down with Nancy Golden and said, look, there's a lot of things that are happening that are unintentional consequences from the things that you're doing. And you don't seem to know what they are or have any sense of them. Because when you go out and talk to people, they're saying, oh yeah, you're doing great. Yes, oh, it's nice. Dr. Golden comes up and says, you guys are fools. You know, you're doing this and it's horrible. Or who goes to Ms. Irwin and says, listen, you've got serious problems here in what you're trying to do around early childhood. You're not getting that. And for instance, your database, longitudinal database, is criticized by person after person after person who knows about databases and what we're trying to do there. And they're saying, you've got to really be much more careful than what you're doing. And it's like you don't even have any idea that that's a problem. Your kindergarten standards and how they are working. I've talked to people in your hubs who are big-time kindergarten people who have say to me, hey, this is garbage, what we're doing here. We're making all sorts of errors. I wonder, are they going to Ms. Irwin and saying, and risking their job to tell her that? Probably not. You've got the ELL. I have really good contacts with the ELL people in our own school district in Portland, and they're saying, yeah, we're fudging kids through on the graduation rates instead of actually teaching them what they need to do to actually become college ready. And so you're really kind of not looking at that. The latest one, which is really interesting, is the stuff with around the SBAC and the assessment testing that we're now going, and you're going to try and equate that. In my school district in Portland, what the Achievement Combat Committee said was, I'm sorry, we can't give you percentages because you can't equate these two tests. You don't know, we don't have any idea. And so what's going to happen to us down there in Portland when we say, I'm sorry, but are you guys, don't you understand this? Doesn't Mr. Saxton here in the OD, doesn't he understand how this doesn't work? I mean, Ms. Vandering can point it out and stand here and point it out and point it out.
Mr. Buell, you want to?
Okay, just
finish it. Go ahead and finish it.
And Ms. Brim Edwards asked a question of Assistant Superintendent Saxton, and he doesn't answer it. It was a simple question. How are we testing and punishing? And Ms. Vandering answered, but does Mr. Saxton not understand the test and punch system, or just does he not want to look at it? My guess is he may understand it and doesn't want to look at it, which is the problem that you're having that's still causing you to not be successful in the state of Oregon. Thank you for the time and energy. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Our last person is Maureen Barnhart. Not here. Okay. With that, we've worked through our agenda. The meeting is adjourned.